Now, I mentioned how 20 years ago, or was it 22 years? 22 years ago, yeah, 22 years ago, as I began practicing this, I had an idea of what my insides would look like once I'm enlightened. But as time went on, I began to realize that what I thought it was going to be like isn't really what it's like. Okay? And many people here, this is a mistake that many people make. What many people do is they start out with an idea of what they want their spiritual experience to be like in the beginning, and then they cling to it the rest of their life, which means they are trying to experience that idea that they had once they first got started. And they don't realize that what the process is doing is removing layers and removing layers of conditioning. So whatever you think it's going to be like in the beginning, it's perfectly okay to have that as a motivating factor. But you have to be open to recognizing that as you go, things are going to change. You're going to see things differently. You're going to pick up either the book I gave you, The Essential Guide to Kriya Yoga Practice, or the Yoga Sutras, or the Bhagavad Gita. You're going to read it in the first 2 or 3 years, and you're going to think, wow, this is great. This makes perfect sense. And then another few years will go by, and you'll read it again, and you'll think, this seems a little different than what I got the first time through. And then 5 more years go by, and you think, wow, have I read this book before? And then time goes on, and every time you pick it up, you realize, you recognize another layer of it. It's not that you missed that layer, it's that because of your practice, you just see more clearly, right? So you want to have an idea of what the experience is like. You can even use the ideas from other people. You can read about Yogananda, Ramana Maharshi, Vivekananda. You can read about all these people, and you can use that as a motivating factor. But you yourself have to be willing to accept however it reveals itself to you. I can remember being at Center for Spiritual Awareness and reading Autobiography of a Yogi and reading how Yogananda was going to just sit until God came to him. And I can remember Mr. Davis talking about how he heard Yogananda say one time that you could experience enlightenment and samadhi if you just practice meditation for mantra meditation for 5 hours straight. So Roy said, all right. So he was going to sit there for 5 hours doing mantra all the way through to see what happened. And what he says was he learned very quickly that it doesn't really work that way unless you are able to actually, truly do it for 5 hours straight, meaning be engaged in the process for 5 hours straight, not sitting there and you're chanting it in your mind and then you drift off. You're still chanting it, but now you're thinking about something else. Oh, wait a minute, okay. Let's come back, chant it some more, and then you realize, oh, wait, I need to wake up. And then you do it some more. You get the idea. Like it's like you're there for 5 hours, sure. So Roy said he learned he could sit for 5 hours. That's what he came up with. But Yogananda said these things, and so I decided myself, well, I'm going to sit there, and I'm not going to get up until it's revealed to me clearly. I'm going to sit here all night if I have to into the next day. I was in one of the guest rooms. I was sitting there in the chair, and I was ready to go. So here I go. I'm sitting there for a while. And then oddly enough, after about an hour and a half of sitting there, it definitely wasn't 2 hours, it was about an hour and a half, I was sitting there, and what I was focusing on was I was kind of contemplating. I wasn't necessarily doing a specific technique. I was contemplating. What is it like, what is God? What is it like to experience this state that the sages and the saints and Yogananda and the teachers of the Kriya tradition, what is it like to experience what they're talking about? And I sat there, and an hour and a half went by, and I was doing pretty good for an hour and a half. And then I just opened my eyes, and I just happened to be looking right out the window. And there's a big oak tree. And I saw the oak tree. And then 2 little deers walked by. or deer, I guess that's the plural. 2 deer walked by, and they just kind of looked over at me. And I was in a room, and there was a hallway in between the room and the window, and it was dark, so I know they really couldn't see me, but they just looked right at me and stared at me. And all of a sudden, there was no fireworks. I did not levitate. But I became aware in that moment that what I was experiencing right then and there was God. That was it. It was the oak tree. It was me in the chair. It was the deer, and it was perfectly quiet. I can remember very well this sensation, but there wasn't any content to it. There wasn't any story to it. It was, I can remember it so well, but there wasn't anything to put my finger on to say, this is what enlightenment is like, so now I can go tell all my friends, And from that point forward, that stuck with me. And whenever I would meditate, I would do my Kriya pranayama practices. I would do alternate nostril breathing. I would go through the routine like I always do. But whatever I felt in my body, whatever I heard all around me, however I felt in my chair, I acknowledged, I felt that was this infinite consciousness. I didn't need anything else. I didn't have to do anything else. And that became enough. And then one day, I went and I visited with Mr. Davis, and I kept having this experience. I know you've heard me talk about this before. And we're sitting there, and he's in his chair, and I'm on the couch, and we've got tea, and we're talking. And, when I met with him, usually I just kind of listened to him talk for about an hour and a half. But there was a pause in the discussion. And I looked at him, and I said, I kind of feel like this is it. And that's all I said. And just sort of looked around and said, I kind of feel like this is it. He took a sip of his tea and he looked around and he said, yep, pretty much. And then he just kept on talking. And it's funny because that really is the extent of the metaphysical conversations I had with him. And anyway, the reason I'm telling you this is because if you begin with an idea of what it's going to be like, acknowledge that is a wonderful motivator for you. It's just a carrot that you need right now, so that you get up in the morning, you do your meditation, and you try your best not to harm people and tell the truth, just to kind of keep you going. But eventually, there will come a time where you're able to do that naturally, and then what you have to do is just start to really pay attention to what it's like. Like, what is your experience like when you meditate? What is your experience like when you have the sense of communion with something greater? In that book, An Essential Guide to Kriya Yoga Practice, there's a question that someone asked, do you have to believe in God to practice this? And I said, no. I don't even really like to use the word God, to be honest with you, because it doesn't really work with what we're talking about. But it's the only thing I got. So I use that word. But you don't have to believe in God in the sense of how we mostly think of God. But you do start to recognize this this intelligence or this power or this presence or this being. Even those words are no good. But it's acknowledging that force or field which allows us all to be here. I mean, really, you all are miracles. To be honest, the fact that you've existed this long and you've pretty much kind of looked the same the whole time, and all of your cells have held themselves together, and you've been able to walk from here to there. I mean, if you just think about how difficult it is for a scientist to program a robot to do something, and then you realize what your body is doing every second, and there are 8 billion people on the planet doing that, and there are all these critters out there doing that, and we're not making it happen. So there's something going on. And the whole purpose and process of spirituality and Kriya Yoga is to not define that, but to recognize that and then to live in harmony with that, and to really live in harmony with it, like to look at it as it is, meaning, there are good things happening in the world. There are bad things happening in the world. Some people have good health, some people have bad health, some people, there are all these different things going on. And we often tend to judge things, but even in the difficult situations, there is some kind of miracle happening there. And I don't mean that in the positive, it's a miracle that Santa brought you that for Christmas kind of thing. I mean the miracle that this exists in the first place. So death, illness, joy, success, all of that is like, it's all tied together. And when you begin to kind of quiet down the mind and the consciousness, and you're able to perceive that or recognize it or appreciate that, then you really actually don't quite mind what happens to you that much. Now that doesn't mean you still don't try to accomplish your goals and be successful and take a shower every now and then and stuff like that. You still want to do that. But you realize that this kind of like cascade of life is eternal. And the purpose of your practice is to recognize the eternal part of yourself. So your body, you've looked in the mirror lately. You're not as young as you used to be, are you? Okay. So things change. But have you ever really noticed that your inner world really hasn't changed that much? And I'm not talking about your personality. Hopefully that has changed. But I'm talking about that inner part of you that is aware of this. It exists all the time. And so when you go into meditation, really what you're doing, remember the scales we were talking about? Well, most people are looking outward. They're looking at the things they've accomplished, the people that they have in their life, their experiences they've collected, as though that is the important thing. All this is going to go away. But there is a part of you which has existed through it all. And when you start to recognize there's a part of you that has existed through it all, you are less troubled by the stuff that comes and go in life. Because, if this life ends, you don't end. You're going to keep going. We don't know where, but we know you're going to keep going. And so that's why people who have experienced what you might want to call an enlightened state, they seem so free because they're not bogged down by all the stuff that in the end isn't going to be there anyway. And they know once this is gone, they're going to persist, and maybe they'll take up another body, maybe they'll have other relationships, maybe they'll experience new things, or maybe they won't. But they're going to know that they still exist. And that is the important thing. Do you understand what I'm trying to say here? It's a hard thing to grasp, but if you can spend some time contemplating the fact that it truly is your inner state that is eternal, and you start defining yourself by your inner state, then it doesn't matter if your body hurts. Then it doesn't matter if some of your relationships don't work out. Then it doesn't matter if you're the most successful person in the world. You are established in this sense of wholeness and this sense of eternity.